The courtroom camera captured the exact moment when confident arrogance transformed into pure panic. Linda Patterson, a 42-year-old woman who had perfected the art of scamming elderly neighbors, sat in the plaintiff's chair with a self-satisfied smile plastered across her face. She had no idea that in exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, Judge Judy Sheindlin would ask her one simple question that would expose years of calculated fraud and send her entire fabricated story crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. What happened next became the fastest courtroom destruction ever captured on television, a masterclass in how decades of legal experience can dismantle even the most carefully constructed lies with surgical precision. Linda had walked into that courtroom believing she had executed the perfect scam. She carried a leather portfolio stuffed with 47 color photographs, meticulously organized repair receipts, printed text message conversations, and even a handwritten timeline of events that she had rehearsed until she could recite it in her sleep. This wasn't her first rodeo in small claims court. In fact, over the past 5 years, she had successfully sued 4 different neighbors for various property disputes, each time walking away with settlement money from elderly people who were too intimidated by the legal system to fight back. She had refined her strategy to an art form, targeting seniors who lived alone, fabricating property damage claims that were just expensive enough to be worth settling but not so large that they would trigger serious investigations. Today was supposed to be payday number 5. A simple $5,000 claim against her 78-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Helen Chen, for fence damage that Linda claimed was caused by Mrs. Chen's supposedly dangerous tree during a violent storm. But Linda Patterson had made one critical, fatal mistake. She had chosen to bring her carefully crafted scam into Judge Judy's courtroom, and Judge Judy had been destroying liars, frauds, and con artists since before Linda was born. Within the first 30 seconds of reviewing the case file that morning, Judge Judy's highly trained instincts had detected something that didn't smell right. The evidence was too perfect, too organized, too rehearsed. Real property disputes are messy, emotional, and full of gaps in documentation. Linda's case file looked like it had been prepared by a law firm, not a supposedly distressed homeowner who had just experienced storm damage. Judge Judy had seen this pattern before, predators who target vulnerable elderly people with fraudulent claims, hoping that the cost of fighting would exceed the cost of settling. She had spent the previous evening doing something Linda never anticipated, actual research into Linda's litigation history, weather records for the area, and property records that would prove to be Linda's ultimate undoing. Mrs. Helen Chen sat trembling in the defendant's chair, looking every bit the vulnerable elderly woman that Linda had calculated she would be. Helen's hands shook slightly as she clutched a simple manila folder containing just a few documents. Unlike Linda's theatrical presentation, Helen's evidence was sparse, almost pathetically so. She had no fancy photographs, no printed text messages, no timeline of events. She simply had her word, her confusion about why her neighbor of 15 years had suddenly turned hostile, and a deep fear that she might lose her home if she was forced to pay $5,000 she didn't have. Helen had immigrated to America 40 years ago, worked as a seamstress her entire life, and had finally paid off her modest home just 3 years before this nightmare began. She didn't understand legal procedures, didn't know how to prepare evidence, and was terrified of the entire court system. Linda had chosen her victim perfectly, or so she thought. The audience in Judge Judy's courtroom that day had no idea they were about to witness legal history in the making. They settled into their seats expecting the usual back-and-forth drama that made the show so addictively watchable. Some were regulars who attended tapings whenever they could, retired folks who had watched Judge Judy demolish entitled people for decades. Others were tourists who had scored free tickets and were just hoping for some entertainment during their vacation. Nobody in that room, except perhaps Judge Judy herself, understood that they were about to see a masterclass in investigative justice, a demonstration of how one perfectly timed question could unravel years of carefully constructed deception. Before we dive into the moment that destroyed Linda Patterson's entire scheme, before we reveal the one question that Judge Judy asked that made this serial scammer's face drain of all color and her voice crack with genuine fear for the first time in years, you need to understand something crucial. Hit that subscribe button right now because what you're about to witness isn't just another courtroom case. This is the moment when preparation met deception and destroyed it completely. This is proof that no matter how carefully you plan your lies, experience and truth will always win. Smash that like button if you're ready to see Judge Judy expose a predator who thought she could outsmart America's toughest judge. Linda Patterson approached the plaintiff's podium with the confidence of someone who had performed this exact routine multiple times before. Her appearance had been carefully calculated to project respectability and victimhood simultaneously. She wore a modest navy blue dress with a simple pearl necklace, her hair styled in a conservative manner that suggested suburban soccer mom rather than serial scammer. Her makeup was perfect but understated, designed to make her look trustworthy and sympathetic. She had practiced this look in the mirror for hours, understanding that in small claims court, perception was often more important than reality. As she began her testimony, her voice carried just the right mixture of indignation and wounded innocence that had worked so effectively in her previous cases. "Your Honor," Linda began, her voice steady and rehearsed, "I'm here today because my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, has been incredibly negligent with a dangerous tree on her property, and it has caused significant damage to our shared fence. On June 15 of this year, during a terrible storm, her massive oak tree dropped a large branch that completely destroyed a 30-foot section of the fence between our properties." She paused for effect, shaking her head with practiced disappointment before continuing. "I had warned her multiple times, Your Honor. Multiple times about that tree. I told her it was dying, that the branches were becoming unstable, that it was only a matter of time before something catastrophic happened. But she refused to listen, and now I'm left with thousands of dollars in damage that I shouldn't have to pay for because of her negligence." Linda then opened her leather portfolio with theatrical precision, pulling out photograph after photograph and spreading them across the podium like a dealer spreading cards. "Look at this damage, Your Honor," she continued, her finger pointing at various images. "This is what her negligence has caused. I have 47 photographs here documenting the destruction from every possible angle. You can see the broken fence panels, the massive branch that fell, the damage to my property. I also have the repair estimates from 3 different contractors, all of them confirming that this will cost approximately $5,000 to fix properly." She produced the receipts with a flourish, each one conveniently highlighted and tabbed for easy reference. The level of organization was impressive, almost professional in its thoroughness. But Linda wasn't finished with her performance. She pulled out printed text messages, claiming they were her attempts to warn Mrs. Chen about the dangerous tree. "Your Honor, I have documentation here showing that I texted her on April 3rd, April 17th, and May 2nd, warning her about the tree's condition. She acknowledged receiving these messages but did nothing. Nothing at all. I even offered to split the cost of having the tree professionally assessed, but she refused that too." Linda's voice took on an edge of righteous anger as she continued. "I've been patient, Your Honor. I've been more than reasonable. But after the storm on June 15 destroyed my fence, I realized I couldn't wait anymore. My property has been damaged, my sense of security has been violated, and I need this court to hold her accountable for her negligence." Judge Judy had been listening to this entire testimony with an expression that regular viewers would recognize as dangerously calm. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled in front of her face, her eyes never leaving Linda's face even as Linda gestured toward her evidence. Judge Judy had heard thousands of testimonies over her 35-year career, and she had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect deception within the first minute of someone speaking. Linda's story had every single red flag that screamed fabrication. The testimony was too smooth, too rehearsed, too perfect. Real victims stumble over their words, get emotional at unexpected moments, forget dates and details. Linda's presentation felt like watching an actress perform a monologue she had memorized, not a genuinely distressed homeowner recounting a traumatic property damage incident. When Linda finally finished her opening statement, Judge Judy turned her attention to Mrs. Helen Chen with a much gentler tone. "Mrs. Chen, tell me your side of this situation." Helen's response was a stark contrast to Linda's polished performance. She spoke softly, with a slight accent, her words hesitant and confused rather than confident and aggressive. "Your Honor, I don't understand what she's talking about with a storm. I don't remember any storm on June 15th. My tree, it's very healthy. I have it inspected every year by the tree service because I'm careful about these things. They trim it, they check it, they tell me it's fine." Helen pulled out a single piece of paper from her manila folder, her hands shaking slightly as she did so. "This is my receipt from April when they came to inspect and trim the tree. They said it was in excellent condition." Linda rolled her eyes dramatically, a calculated gesture designed to make Helen look like a confused elderly woman who couldn't remember basic facts. Judge Judy caught that eye roll, and her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Helen continued, her voice growing even softer. "The fence, it has some damage, yes, but that damage has been there for many years. Little pieces break off over time because it's old. I've been saving money to replace it, but I'm on a fixed income and fence replacement is very expensive. I never had any texts from her about the tree. She pointed at Linda with a trembling finger. She only started talking to me about the fence 2 months ago, saying I needed to pay her $5,000 or she would sue me. I told her I don't have $5,000 and that I didn't damage anything, and then she said she would take me to court. The courtroom atmosphere had shifted noticeably. The audience members were exchanging glances, their expressions suggesting they were beginning to suspect something wasn't quite right with Linda's story. Judge Judy was taking notes, lots of notes, her pen moving across the paper with deliberate strokes. She looked up at Linda with an expression that made Linda's confident smile falter for just a fraction of a second. "Ms. Patterson," Judge Judy said, her tone deceptively casual, "I have some questions for you. But first, let me make sure I understand your timeline correctly." The room went completely silent, and everyone present could sense that something significant was about to happen. Linda straightened her shoulders, thinking she was prepared for whatever Judge Judy might ask, completely unaware that her entire fabricated story was about to collapse. Judge Judy closed Linda's evidence folder with deliberate slowness, the sound of the leather cover meeting the podium echoing through the silent courtroom like a warning shot. She leaned back in her chair, that iconic posture that every regular viewer knew meant someone was about to have their entire world turned upside down. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Linda Patterson's face with the intensity of a predator that had been patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Linda, interpreting this pause as Judge Judy's need to process all her impressive evidence, allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had done this before. She knew how these cases worked. Judges looked at the evidence, saw that one side had documentation while the other had nothing, and ruled in favor of the prepared party. In her mind, she had already won this case. She was mentally calculating how she would spend the $5,000, perhaps a vacation or some new furniture. She had no idea that Judge Judy had spent the entire testimony cataloging every inconsistency, every too-perfect detail, every practiced gesture that screamed deception. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity but was actually only about 15 seconds. The audience members sat frozen in their seats, sensing that something significant was building. The camera operators adjusted their positions slightly, instinctively understanding that whatever was about to happen needed to be captured perfectly. Mrs. Chen sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking small and vulnerable, hoping against hope that somehow the truth would prevail despite her lack of fancy evidence and polished presentation. Judge Judy's bailiff, who had worked with her for years and had seen her dismantle countless liars, shifted his weight slightly, recognizing the telltale signs that Judge Judy was about to deploy one of her legendary tactical strikes. This was the calm before the storm, the moment of stillness before the thunder. Smash that like button right now because what you're about to witness is the most perfectly executed courtroom trap in television history. Judge Judy is about to ask one question, just one single question, that will cause Linda Patterson's entire elaborate scam to unravel in real time. Comment caught if you've already figured out what Judge Judy has spotted in Linda's testimony. Hit subscribe because you won't believe how fast 20 minutes of preparation can be destroyed in 20 seconds when you're facing a judge with 35 years of experience catching liars. Trust me, what happens next will restore your faith that justice can be swift, decisive, and absolutely devastating to those who try to manipulate the system. Judge Judy finally broke the silence, her voice cutting through the courtroom air with surgical precision. "Ms. Patterson," she began, her tone deceptively casual and conversational, "I have just one question for you before we proceed." Linda's posture straightened even more, if that was possible. She had prepared for dozens of potential questions, had rehearsed answers to everything she thought Judge Judy might ask about the tree, the fence, the damages, the timeline. She looked directly at Judge Judy with what she believed was an expression of earnest cooperation, ready to provide whatever clarification the judge needed. "Your Honor, I'm happy to answer any questions you have," Linda responded, her voice dripping with false humility and eagerness to help. The audience could see it, even if Linda couldn't. The trap was set, and she was about to walk right into it. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked onto Linda's face with an intensity that made several audience members unconsciously hold their breath. The question came out slowly, each word deliberately enunciated, giving it weight and importance. "Ms. Patterson, what was the exact date that this storm damaged your fence?" The question hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. To most people in the courtroom, it seemed like a simple clarification question, almost mundane in its straightforwardness. But Judge Judy's tone suggested there was something much more significant happening beneath the surface. Linda, however, didn't catch the warning signs. She had mentioned the date multiple times already in her testimony. This was an easy question, a softball that she could knock out of the park. Linda answered without hesitation, her confidence actually growing because she thought Judge Judy was just confirming basic facts. June 15th, Your Honor. I remember it very clearly because it was my daughter's birthday. We had planned a party in the backyard, but the storm that morning was so severe that we had to move everything inside. It was quite traumatic, actually, watching that branch come crashing down during what should have been a celebration. She even added a small, sad smile, as if the memory still pained her. The detail about her daughter's birthday was a nice touch, she thought. It made the date memorable and gave her story emotional weight. Judge Judy nodded slowly, as if accepting this answer, and Linda felt a surge of victory. She had passed the test. The judge was satisfied with her response. But then Judge Judy reached beneath her desk and pulled out a document that Linda hadn't seen before. The movement was smooth and practiced, like a magician revealing the card that would complete the trick. She held up the papers so the camera could capture them, and the audience could see official letterhead at the top. Ms. Patterson, Judge Judy said, her voice now carrying an edge that made Linda's confident expression finally begin to crack, I have here the official weather records from the National Weather Service for this area covering the entire month of June. Linda's smile froze on her face, transforming into something that looked more like a grimace. A tiny bead of sweat appeared on her forehead, visible even to the cameras. Judge Judy continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, and according to these official government records, there was no storm in your area on June 15th. The courtroom erupted in quiet gasps and murmurs. Linda's face began to change color, the confident pink flush of certainty draining away to leave something pale and sickly looking underneath. Judge Judy wasn't finished. In fact, Ms. Patterson, there wasn't a significant storm anywhere in this region for 3 weeks before June 15th or 2 weeks after. The only notable weather event during that time period was on July 8th, and that wasn't a storm at all. It was a heat wave with temperatures reaching 98 degrees. She paused, letting the implications of this information sink in. So let me ask you again, Ms. Patterson. What storm are you talking about? Linda's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. Her carefully constructed story, the foundation upon which her entire case rested, had just been demolished with official documentation that she never anticipated Judge Judy would have. Her hands began to tremble, the confident grip on her leather portfolio loosening as panic started to override her practiced composure. Well, she stammered, her voice no longer smooth and rehearsed but shaky and uncertain. Maybe I have the date wrong. Maybe it was a different day. The weather was bad, I know that for certain. The audience could see it happening in real time. The scammer was being exposed, and she was desperately trying to backtrack, to salvage something from the wreckage of her lie. But Judge Judy was just getting started, and Linda Patterson's nightmare was only beginning. Judge Judy's expression transformed from calm inquiry to controlled fury as she watched Linda Patterson attempt to squirm out of the trap that had just snapped shut around her fabricated story. The weather records remained held up in Judge Judy's hand like evidence at a murder trial, irrefutable proof that the foundation of Linda's entire case was built on lies. Ms. Patterson, Judge Judy's voice cut through Linda's stammering attempts at explanation, you don't just forget the date of a storm that caused $5,000 worth of damage to your property. You certainly don't confuse it with your daughter's birthday party. That's not the kind of detail people get wrong. The audience sat transfixed, watching the systematic destruction of what had seemed like an airtight case just moments before. Linda's face had gone from pale to splotchy red, her neck breaking out in nervous hives that her makeup couldn't conceal. But Judge Judy wasn't done dismantling Linda's elaborate deception. She set down the weather records and picked up the photographs that Linda had so proudly displayed minutes earlier. Let's examine your evidence more carefully, shall we? Judge Judy's tone carried the satisfaction of someone who had been waiting patiently to spring a trap. She held up one of the photographs showing the damaged fence. Ms. Patterson, these photographs you've provided are quite interesting. Very professional quality, excellent lighting, multiple angles. Almost like they were taken by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. She paused, letting the implication hang in the air before delivering her next strike. Tell me, when did you take these 47 photographs? Linda's voice cracked as she answered. Right after the storm, Your Honor. I wanted to document everything while the damage was fresh. Judge Judy's eyebrows raised in that expression that millions of viewers had come to recognize as the precursor to complete destruction. That's fascinating, Ms. Patterson, because digital photographs contain something called metadata. Do you know what metadata is? Linda shook her head slightly, her confident demeanor now completely shattered and replaced with visible dread. Metadata tells us exactly when a photograph was taken, what device was used, sometimes even the location. Judge Judy held up several of the photos. These photographs weren't all taken on the same day, Ms. Patterson. According to the metadata, which I had my staff analyze yesterday, these images were taken over a period of 4 months. This photo was taken in March. This one in April. This one in May. And this one, the one showing the most damage, was taken just 2 weeks ago in early September. The courtroom exploded in murmurs and gasps. Linda's carefully constructed case was collapsing like a building in an earthquake, each revelation causing another structural failure. Mrs. Chen, who had been sitting quietly and looking confused, now had tears streaming down her face as she began to understand that someone had actually believed her simple truth over Linda's elaborate lies. Judge Judy wasn't finished with her systematic destruction. She picked up the repair receipts that Linda had presented as proof of her damages. And these receipts, Ms. Patterson, let's talk about these for a moment. You claim you've already had the fence repaired and that's why you need Mrs. Chen to reimburse you $5,000. But I made a few phone calls yesterday to these contractors whose names appear on these receipts. Linda's face went from splotchy red to completely white in an instant. Her hands gripped the edges of the podium so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Judge Judy continued with the relentless precision of a prosecutor closing in for the kill. 2 of these companies have never heard of you, Ms. Patterson. They have no record of ever doing work at your address. The 3rd company, Harrison Fencing, did come to your property for an estimate, but you never hired them to do any actual work. So these receipts you presented to this court are fabricated. They're fake. You created false documents and brought them into my courtroom as evidence. Do you understand the severity of what you've done? Linda opened her mouth to respond but only a strangled sound came out. Judge Judy wasn't waiting for an answer anyway. But here's what makes your fraud truly despicable, Ms. Patterson. Judge Judy's voice took on a harder edge, the kind of tone that cut through excuses and justifications like a hot knife through butter. I did some research into your litigation history. In the past 5 years, you've filed small claims suits against 4 different neighbors. 4 different elderly neighbors, I should specify. Every single case followed the same pattern. Property damage claims ranging from $3,000 to $6,000, always against senior citizens living alone, always settled out of court because your victims couldn't afford lawyers or were too intimidated by the legal system to fight back. You're not a victim, Ms. Patterson. You're a predator. You target vulnerable elderly people, fabricate property damage, create false evidence, and then bully them into paying you settlement money to avoid court. The audience's murmurs had turned into outright expressions of disgust and anger. Several people were shaking their heads, and one woman in the 3rd row audibly said, "That's despicable," loud enough for the microphones to pick up. Linda's attempt at maintaining any dignity had completely disintegrated. Tears were now streaming down her face, but these weren't the calculated tears of a performer trying to gain sympathy. These were tears of genuine panic and fear as she realized the magnitude of trouble she was in. Your Honor, please, Linda's voice came out as a desperate whine, nothing like the confident, rehearsed tone she had used when presenting her case. I can explain. This is all a misunderstanding. You don't understand the full situation. Judge Judy cut her off with a sharp gesture. Oh, I understand perfectly, Ms. Patterson. I understand that you thought you could come into my courtroom with your fabricated evidence and your rehearsed testimony and scam another elderly person out of money they don't have. What you didn't understand is that I've been doing this for 35 years. I've seen every type of scam, every variety of con artist, and every breed of fraud that exists. You're not original, Ms. Patterson. You're just another predator who got caught. Linda tried one more desperate attempt at salvaging the situation. But the fence really is damaged, Your Honor. That part is true. Mrs. Chen's property is connected to mine, and there is damage that needs to be repaired. Judge Judy leaned forward, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made even the camera operators feel uncomfortable. Yes, Ms. Patterson, there is damage to an old fence that has deteriorated over years of normal wear and tear. But you tried to turn natural deterioration into a fabricated storm damage claim so you could extract $5,000 from a 78-year-old woman living on a fixed income. And let's be absolutely clear about your endgame here. You weren't planning to use that money to fix any fence, were you? Your pattern with previous victims shows that you take settlement money and then never make any repairs. You're nothing more than a con artist who has found a profitable niche targeting senior citizens who are too scared or too poor to fight back. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted completely. What had started as a simple property dispute had been exposed as something far more sinister, a calculated fraud perpetrated by a serial scammer who had finally met her match. Judge Judy's final ruling came down with the force of a judicial hammer, swift and devastating in its completeness. The case is dismissed, she declared, her voice carrying absolute authority that left no room for appeal or negotiation. Ms. Patterson, you will receive nothing. Not 1 penny. Not 1 cent. Your fabricated storm, your falsified evidence, and your calculated targeting of vulnerable elderly people ends today in my courtroom. But Judge Judy wasn't finished delivering consequences. She turned her attention to Mrs. Chen, whose tears of relief were now flowing freely as the weight of months of stress and fear finally lifted from her shoulders. Mrs. Chen, I am awarding you $2,500 for court costs, emotional distress, and the sheer harassment you've endured from this predator. Ms. Patterson will pay you, and she will pay you within 30 days or face additional legal consequences. Linda's leg seemed to give out slightly, and she grabbed the podium for support. Her face had gone beyond pale into a grayish tone that suggested she might actually faint on camera. But the worst was yet to come, and Judge Judy delivered it with the cold precision of someone who had waited their entire career for a case exactly like this one. Ms. Patterson, I am referring your case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of multiple counts of fraud, perjury, and filing false police reports. The documents you brought into this courtroom as evidence are fabricated, which means you have committed perjury in my court. That is a criminal offense, not just a civil matter. The audience erupted in spontaneous applause, the kind of genuine reaction that couldn't be manufactured or rehearsed. They had just witnessed justice being served in its purest form. Linda's voice came out as a desperate wail that echoed through the courtroom. Your Honor, please, you can't do this to me. I have children. I have a family. I can't face criminal charges. Please, I'm begging you. This plea for mercy stood in stark contrast to the confident, condescending woman who had strutted into the courtroom just 20 minutes earlier. Judge Judy's response was ice-cold and absolutely merciless. You should have thought about your children before you decided to make a career out of defrauding elderly people, Ms. Patterson. You should have considered your family before you fabricated evidence and lied under oath in a court of law. Your actions have consequences, and those consequences start today. Sarah Martinez had a family too. Mrs. Chen has children who have watched their mother suffer under your harassment. You showed them no mercy, and you will receive none from me. The bailiff moved forward as Judge Judy continued. Furthermore, I am ordering that transcripts of this case be sent to the prosecutors handling your 4 previous settlements. Those cases need to be reopened and investigated. If your pattern of behavior holds, those settlements were obtained through fraud as well, and your previous victims deserve restitution. Linda was openly sobbing now, her designer dress wrinkled and her makeup running in dark streaks down her face. The leather portfolio that had contained her fake evidence lay scattered on the floor where it had fallen from her shaking hands. Security was already moving toward her, prepared to escort her from the courtroom as Judge Judy delivered her final words on the matter. Ms. Patterson, you came into my courtroom thinking you were smarter than everyone else. You thought your preparation and fake evidence would overwhelm an elderly immigrant woman who couldn't afford a lawyer. But you forgot one crucial thing. Truth always has a way of revealing itself when the right questions are asked. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to seal Linda Patterson's fate permanently. Court is adjourned. Mrs. Chen, you are free to go with my sincere apologies that you had to endure this harassment. Ms. Patterson, you will be hearing from the District Attorney's Office very soon. The courtroom remained in stunned silence for just a moment before erupting again in applause, this time even louder and more sustained. Mrs. Chen was surrounded by well-wishers from the audience, people patting her shoulder and telling her how brave she was. Linda was escorted out by security, her sobs echoing down the hallway even after she disappeared from view. The court stenographer, who had been recording every word, later told colleagues that in 20 years of working in courtrooms, she had never seen such a complete and total destruction of a plaintiff's case in such a short period of time. Within 3 hours of the episode airing, the clip had been viewed over 2 million times on social media. By the end of the day, it had reached 15 million views and was trending on every major platform. The hashtag #OneQuestion became viral as people shared their own stories of standing up to scammers and bullies. Legal experts praised Judge Judy's methodical approach to exposing the fraud, noting that her preparation and research had turned what could have been a he-said-she-said case into an ironclad exposure of criminal behavior. Local news stations in Linda's hometown picked up the story, running segments titled "Serial Scammer Exposed" on national television and "Judge Judy Takes Down Neighborhood Predator." Linda's face became instantly recognizable in her community, making it impossible for her to continue her pattern of targeting vulnerable neighbors. The district attorney's office moved quickly on Judge Judy's referral. Within 2 weeks, Linda Patterson was formally charged with 5 counts of fraud, 3 counts of perjury, and 2 counts of elder abuse. The prosecutors reached out to her 4 previous victims, all of whom came forward with strikingly similar stories of harassment, fabricated claims, and coerced settlements. What Linda thought would be an easy $5,000 payday had turned into criminal charges that could result in years in prison and mandatory restitution to all her victims. Mrs. Chen became a local hero, interviewed by news outlets about her experience and praised for her courage in standing up to a predator despite her fear and lack of resources. She used part of her $2,500 award to finally fix her fence properly, and her neighbors organized a community fundraiser that raised enough money to help her with other home repairs she had been putting off due to financial constraints. The case became a landmark moment in courtroom television history, studied by legal professionals and communication scholars as a perfect example of how proper investigation and one perfectly timed question can expose even the most carefully constructed lies. Judge Judy's methodical destruction of Linda's fabricated story reminded millions of viewers that justice still exists for those brave enough to stand up for truth, even when facing someone with more resources, better preparation, and seeming advantages. The moral was crystal clear. No amount of fake evidence, rehearsed testimony, or calculated targeting of vulnerable people can withstand the scrutiny of someone who knows exactly what questions to ask and refuses to be fooled by surface appearances. If this story of justice served and predators exposed moved you, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss another moment of Judge Judy delivering the accountability that scammers desperately need. Smash that like button if you believe one perfect question is worth more than 1,000 lies. Comment below what you would have asked Linda if you were in Judge Judy's chair. Share this video with anyone who needs to be reminded that truth always wins when it faces real experience and preparation. Remember, in Judge Judy's courtroom and in life, you can rehearse your lies all you want, but you can't prepare for someone who has seen every scam before and knows exactly how to expose it. The next time you think about cutting corners or manipulating the system, remember Linda Patterson and what happened when she faced someone who asked the one question she never prepared for. Justice is real, accountability is inevitable, and Judge Judy proved once again why she remains the greatest courtroom legend in television history.